I've got several different things on my mind, several different things at once. Who would have thought? But first of all is the Black Knight archetype. And I've always identified with the Black Knight. And of course, it's not always literally the Black Knight, but oftentimes it is. In medieval storylines, fantasy, you have Black Knight characters. I think the first example that comes to mind is from Final Fantasy II. And I grew up playing Final Fantasy II, so I call it that. I know later it was revealed that it's actually Final Fantasy IV in Japan, but because it was the second Final Fantasy to come out in the US, it was Final Fantasy II here. I'm going to call it Final Fantasy II because that's what I played and that's what I know, and I wasn't a big enough nerd, until they re-released it and I found out. I was a big nerd, but I wasn't a big enough nerd to know from the beginning. But in that story, well, first of all, the Black Knight is usually a supporting character. It's usually a very stoic character who looks scary, looks like a bad guy, either does some bad things or is so morally ambiguous that you don't really know where they stand. And Final Fantasy II is interesting. It's the most black and white example that I can think of, because the main character, Cecil, starts out as the Black Knight. He works for the king, and he's somewhat of a hero in the story originally. The backstory, he's never a hero in the beginning of the story, but the backstory is that he was this hero, the Black Knight, and the king turns bad. The king, of course, the king's under the control of some spell, and so he starts ordering Cecil to do bad things. And being a PG game, that means stealing crystals from people who don't deserve to have their crystals stolen. Those nice little people, they didn't deserve to have those crystals stolen. But he starts doing that, and he starts questioning what he's doing. I don't remember him killing anybody. Like I said, it's a PG game, and you kill people, but he doesn't do anything. Oh, no, he does. No, he burns the village. He ends up burning a village, I think. Something like that. But he questions what he's doing, and the game is basically... The first half of the game is his transformation, and he ends up climbing a mountain and transforming into this paladin of light. And, of course, he doesn't look cool. He looks fucking stupid. I remember being so disappointed, because I love that Black Knight character. They're always cool looking. If they're not cool looking, then somebody made a big fucking mistake in the development stage, because Black Knights are always cool looking, or they're supposed to be. But Cecil, yeah, he becomes a paladin after he has to literally fight himself. He has to fight the Black Knight version of himself at the top of this mountain. It's quite magical, and he transforms into this paladin with kind of light purple hair and like white and yellow, like clothes that represent lightness. And he looks dumb, but he's stronger and better for it, which sometimes happens in life. It doesn't, being good doesn't look cool, A lot of the time it doesn't. But that's the most black and white example I can think of, literally black and white. And the game, video games were much simpler then, but it's still a good, complex storyline. Like talking about this guy who is in this dark world where he does bad things, and he climbs a mountain and literally fights his dark side and transforms. It's a classic, like, mythical sort of story, really. And the game's simple, but it's pretty profound. And that's a black and white transformation. Normally the transformation the contrast isn't that strong in the transformation of the Black Knight, or there is no transformation. Sometimes the Black Knight is set up to be kind of morally ambiguous or kind of bad, and then as the story goes on, he starts like gradually doing good things, but doesn't necessarily become wholly good. I think a good example of that is in Game of Thrones, the Hound character, where he kills a child in the beginning, but to put it into perspective, because normally the Black Knight character isn't that bad. They're not going to have him kill a kid if they're going to have him redeem himself. He might do something bad in war or something like that. He might do the bidding of an evil king or an evil leader, because typically he isn't the main bad guy. It's very rare to find a Black Knight who is running the show. He's not the main villain. But the Hound is a great example, because he's doing the bidding of this awful king, this awful little brat, or even like the king before that, whatever it is. I'm not an expert. But he's a very bad guy, but you kind of wonder about him. Even early on, I kind of was like, he's a bad guy, but I kind of wondered. And his transformation is very... It's a lot more black and white, too, when I think about it, because he kills this child, this innocent child, in the beginning of the show, and then later in the show, he spends his time protecting a child. But that show's a brutal show, so of course they would have the Black Knight kill a child. You figure in one of the very first scenes in the entire series, one of like the purest characters, one of like the most likable characters, Ned Stark, beheads a guy for, false reasons. He kills a guy for deserting his post, and it's like when the guy deserted his post for good reason. So it's like they start out with that show where like all the good guys do things that would otherwise make characters bad guys, and that's sort of the drama and intrigue of the show. It's a show about wine drinking, drunks who try to rape everything and sometimes succeed and then behead everybody else. And so I mean, you're going to have a little moral ambiguity with all the characters, but the Hound is a great example because he's not very likable. He's ugly. He's literally the Black Knight. He wears all black. He's a killer. And even when he redeems himself in the show, he's not the paladin from Final Fantasy II. He's this he's still this stoic, at least on the surface, heartless guy, but you find out he's not so heartless. He's a curmudgeon with a heart of gold, which is sort of that archetype runs parallel with the Black Knight. But I was thinking I was trying to think of examples of the Black Knight in stories that don't involve swords and sorcery. And Racer X is one. I know I've talked about Racer X before, and I don't really know what the story arc is with Racer X from Speed Racer, because you have Speed Racer, who is like the pure little good guy, and I've never liked that character. Not that I don't like it, but I've never been drawn to that main, like, pure good guy, the boy who, finds his way, becomes a man, becomes the hero, the star of the show. I've never been a fan of the leading man in most cases. I've been a fan of the Dark Knight. I guess... Well, to go back to Racer X, he's very mysterious. He's much cooler looking than Speed Racer, and he shows up to, help, but you don't really know what he stands for. He's very secretive, and maybe that's revealed on the show, but to be honest, I only ever saw that show like a few times. I think MTV played it on occasion when I was a kid, and so I'd get little glimpses, and I was just like, whoa, Racer X, he looks cool, he must be cool. He does some unexpectedly cool things, but you never really know where he stands. And it's that sort of stoicism, that mystery that's a major appeal to the Black Knight. I guess Han Solo might be another example. He's sort of the mercenary, because they're often a mercenary sort of character. It keeps them in that morally ambiguous zone. They don't want to commit to the cause. Luke Skywalker right away is like, I want to help people. I want to join whatever he does, And the Han Solo is sort of like, I just want to get paid. And I'll help you if I can, that kind of thing. And then, of course, he redeems himself. But Star Wars, obviously, the true Black Knight, the literal Black Knight, is Darth Vader. And he goes through a similar sort of transformation where he's just absolutely bad. He's much worse. He's sort of like the Hound, but once again, he's not running the show. He's not the Emperor. Even though he has a lot more autonomy than the average Black Knight character, he's still doing the Emperor's bidding. And we know that he had a history as being somewhat decent until the prequels came out, and we realized that Anakin was never okay and never good. He was absolutely awful. And Darth Vader is actually a much better person than young Anakin. But anyway, I'm being hard on him. Jake Lloyd lost his mind or something. He developed schizophrenia, and he blames George Lucas because of how shitty the prequels were. It's sad. No, I mean, I'm not making light of that. It is very sad, but it's also like life is crazy. Who would have thought, like, seeing Star Wars and like all, when the prequel came out, that kid would lose his mind because of that role, or at least his life would be negatively impacted, and it would contribute to maybe existing mental health issues. But that's a topic for another time that I'll never get into. I have no interest in talking about this again. But anyway, Darth Vader, he redeems himself at the very end. He takes out the big bad guy. He's the bad guy, but he takes out the big bad guy, the Emperor. And so he has that Black Knight transformation where he becomes good again, and we see his kind spirit hanging out with the other good Jedi Masters in the very end. So I don't know. Han Solo's not really that. He's the rogue. Now, I shouldn't have even said anything about Han Solo. He's very much the the sort of like mercenary rogue sort of guy. But there's sort of a bleed through that kind of bleeds in with the Dark Knight. What's another example? I don't know. There are many examples. It's a very common archetype, a very common character, and I've always been drawn to it. And often they don't say much. That character doesn't say much because if he says much, a character who says too much, you're gonna figure out pretty quickly whether he's good or bad, or sort of what he's all about. And those characters really depend on this ambiguity. Spawn was another one because I was thinking Batman, but Batman is really, despite being called the Dark Knight, he's really a false Black Knight. There's really nothing about Batman that makes him a Black Knight. He's not morally ambiguous. His backstory, maybe I don't know enough about Batman lore, but his story is just that his parents died and now he fights crime, essentially, and he looks very scary. He basically puts on the image of a Black Knight, but he's really a goth Superman or something like that. Minus what, I don't know. I don't really care about superheroes. That's the thing, is like I spent some time being into superheroes as a kid, but I was never really hooked into them. The one that I really liked was Spawn, and Spawn is absolutely a Black Knight, whereas Batman is sort of a false Black Knight. He's a Black Knight, or he's I don't know what he is, but he's a goth Superman. That's what I'm going to say, which is not a Black Knight at all. But Spawn is, his backstory is that he was a really bad guy who worked for the government. Once again, he wasn't the big bad guy. He wasn't the government. He was a trained assassin, a killer who was betrayed. And, he's trying to figure things out as Spawn, as a minion of Satan. But he's doing good, and he's searching for light, and that's what like in Final Fantasy, the very literal example, Final Fantasy II, the Black Knight becomes white. He becomes the White Knight. The Black Knight character is always kind of searching for the light. He's always trying to follow that white light, and Spawn is very much doing that. And of course, people don't want to accept it because he's mangled and he's in scary clothes and this and that, but still, that's what he's doing. And I stopped following Spawn when I was a kid. Last year I reread the first 20 issues or so, and I was kind of worried that I was regressing. I was like, oh fuck, like I'm rereading Spawn. I haven't given a shit about this since I was like 12 years old. What am I doing? But I think it was all part of this, where it's like, I think there's something to be gained. It's the comic was much simpler than I remember, at least those early issues. Like at the time, it seemed mind-blowing that this was a comic and this was a superhero, an anti-hero. He's an anti-hero. He ain't a superhero. But rereading it now, there's a nice sort of simplicity to it. The dialogue and storylines are much simpler than I remember as a kid. Naturally, I guess, Although I feel like my brain is simpler than when I was a kid. I feel like I don't know. I feel like I respond much more to like cheesy things, and like, I don't know, cliches have a much more profound impact on me now than when I was a kid figuring things out. But anyway, Spawn kind of fit nicely into last year, where I was at. But I guess like the good thing about the Black Knight character is, if you feel that way, and I don't necessarily know that I'm the Black Knight character, but I think there's a part of me that's kind of deliberately and intentionally and unintentionally sort of like tried to go for that. It's not something I think about, but it's in me somewhere. When you consume a lot of media at a young age and you respond to that sort of character, it's going to influence you. And I look at my interests in metal, dark experimental music, my artwork, things like that. And naturally, that Black Knight thing is manifested in who I am, and I do try to do good. I'm not somebody who's ever embraced the whole like, I'm a dark guy, so I'm gonna be a dark guy who treats people like shit. Like I've never embraced that. Like even if I've treated people like shit, which I have, it hasn't come from a place of malice. It's just been being a human being, fucking up and being confused all the time. Whether I'm doing good or bad, I'm fucking confused, man. But yeah, so that Black Knight sort of archetype has really been something that's impacted my life. And I feel like I've kind of gone through somewhat of a transformation. Even though I've always tried to have that heart of gold, I feel like in the last year, hardcore, in the last like couple years, but definitely the last year, I've gone hardline toward the light. I was joking to a friend a couple days ago. I may have mentioned this in another video, but uh, I'm so lucky it's 2018 because I don't have to become a born again Christian or like, become a monk. Because you always hear about those people who, have some sort of weird epiphany and then they become a born again Christian when you would never have expected that out of someone. And I feel like fortunately I'm in 2018 and I have so many points of reference available that I don't have to become a born again Christian. I can just like pretend to be once in a while. And that kind of plays into something I'm going to talk about, pretending to be something. I had an epiphany the other day when I was listening to a podcast and this rune magician was talking about, and I don't follow that stuff. I'm into like Nordic stuff. I'm into all that. Bits and pieces though. I don't I don't practice that shit. I'm not some neo-pagan, but I'll take bits and pieces from things. And there was this rune magician talking about how Odin, in Norse mythology, when Odin has a task to do out in the world, he doesn't play a certain role in order to do that task. He becomes that role. He becomes what he needs to do. And I was thinking about that in my own life because, if you feel kind of conflicted at times, like you feel like you're the Dark Knight or you feel like you're this or the Black Knight, you feel like you're this or that, and then there's this weird sort of dissonance inside of you. Like I know sometimes like I feel the need to keep up this image, this stoic image, this dark artist sort of thing, and that sort of conflicts with being a nice person, with being kind, like asking a cashier like how their fucking day is. Sometimes you feel like you're at odds with who you're supposed to be. And the Odin idea really resonated with me because it's like you can become that. You can be that in that moment. You can be a multitude of things that are otherwise at odds with each other. If you have access to all of those things, you can be those different things, and there shouldn't be any dissonance. You should own whatever you're doing at that given time. If you go to work and you have to wear an outfit, you have to dress in office casual and answer the phone and like be a customer service representative. I mean, that sucks like on a robot level to have to become a robot like that and not be yourself. But you can own it. You can be that without killing a part of your soul. I mean, I think that kind of work often kills people's souls no matter what. But there's a lot about so-called professionalism that really is not that doesn't do well in making you a professional human. But anyway, you can play a role at work. You can play a role. You can be a kind. You can be a warrior and then go home and be like a nice husband and father. You don't have to be a warrior at home. You can own that. You can own those different parts of yourself. And that's what that Odin thing made me think. And I was talking to a friend in Sweden, my buddy Tommy. He's about 15 years older than me, I think. He's about 15 years older, and he's got a couple kids. One of them's grown, and that doesn't matter, but it's just interesting talking to somebody in a different part of the world who has has lived a slightly different life. We have the same interests, hence knowing him. But I was talking to him about the Odin thing, and it felt especially poignant, just talking shit about Odin with a guy in Sweden, being Swedish American myself, American Swedish. But talking to him about this Odin idea, and he responded really strongly to it. And like I was talking to him too about even when you become that role, how you have to kind of like keep yourself in check. I had this experience a couple years ago where a thief stole my girlfriend's friend's wallet while we were doing karaoke, and I confronted the thief. And I turned into a wolf, I became the wolf in that moment, and I interrogated this thief. It was this woman, and I was so heated. But I was saying to my friend last night, this experience was weird because it's one of the angriest moments I've ever had. I'm a nonviolent person, and I'm generally not prone to like explosive anger. But I wasn't screaming, but I was very harsh. I was speaking very harshly to this person in front of other people, and I don't. It's like I have my own. I deal with anger in my own way, but I've had very few moments where I exploded in anger like that. But what's strange is I could feel the level of control I felt was very strange. I felt like I almost had this hand on my shoulder, this invisible hand, kind of keeping me from the edge. Like to everybody else, I probably seemed like I had just completely lost it. I mean, like really just unprecedented behavior for me. But I could feel this hand kind of keeping me from going too far. Like, and by too far, I don't mean violent, but just like losing all wit, because I was kind of interrogating the woman and getting her to admit a bunch of things, and I don't know, there was a lot to it. And my girlfriend at the time was just terrified. Like, she was really affected by it. It probably changed the course of our relationship, unfortunately, because I think she thought that I was just completely unhinged. And I'm not saying this as damage control or anything, but I wasn't. I felt completely in control. I felt invested in this role, and so invested that I was that in that moment, but I felt this hand keeping me there. And my friend Tommy last night, he said, that's when you need to turn to your girlfriend or whoever and give them a wink. And I was like, oh man, and that's Odin, because Odin has one eye. So it's like the wink, and Odin's one eye has like all kinds of, there's backstory there. But I think with things like Odin in Norse mythology, you have to apply it in your own way and have your own interpretations. And the idea of his one eye being a wink, and using that example of him investing in a role but having one eye as, this is what it looks like to have one eye. Having that one eye there to kind of remind people like, hey, I'm in control. And that's important. I wish I would have done that then. I wish I would have turned and said, hey guys, don't worry. But instead I just stayed. In that moment, I was this fierce, person. And afterwards, my girlfriend's friend who had had her wallet stolen, was like, that was like watching an action movie. That's what she said. She was like, that was like she wasn't as upset, I think, because she was upset about her wallet getting stolen. I mean, it was probably disturbing to her on some level, but to her, what she saw was like, I was like this action movie character, which like, my ego doesn't need to hear that, my ego's already out of control enough at times without being told that my explosive anger was like something out of an action movie hero. Or maybe maybe she meant I was the bad guy in an action movie. I don't know. I definitely became a cop in that moment. That's more what I was. I was kind of a detective, an interrogator, more than I was anything else. But I did feel I was almost intoxicated by the amount of control I had. And I'm not some tough guy, and I pick my spots. I really do. Like, if that had been some big, like, 6'5" thug who stole the wallet, like, do you think I would have gotten in their face? Probably not, because I think, at a certain point, like, I'm not that stupid. I'll say that. I'm not that stupid. I can be arrogant. I can be a lot of things, but I'm not so stupid that I would confront somebody who could and probably would just smash me, like just like that. That's what I imagine. Like, I imagine going up to some like 6'5" monster gangster who just like smashes me down to earth like the Hulk or something. I probably wouldn't have gone up to them and done that. But I do pick my spots, and I don't know, I try to pick my spots in a way that's not totally just like, I don't know. Picking your spots would be a great topic for another time, because there's no shame in picking your spots. There's no shame in like making an impact when you safely can. I don't know. That's, like I said, that's a topic for another time. But that Odin idea is something that's been resonating with me a lot, because I have felt conflicted at times in my life. I have felt like I'm balancing these different roles. I'm a very compartmentalized person, and my different friendships and relationships and activities and things sometimes seem at odds with each other, but I also have realized that that's okay. Those are all parts of who I am, and there's a reason why I can access those. I don't feel false when I'm doing that. I don't feel false when I'm helping a friend do something. I don't feel false when I'm being nice to somebody for no reason. And not to say that I'm some great nice person, but I as part of my like my own weird like climbing to the top of the mountain and fighting my dark night. I don't. Fortunately, I don't have white purplish hair, and I'm not wearing a yellow cape. That's the next step. That's the next video. Is my makeover, my paladin makeover. But, part of my own fighting with my own Black Knight is trying to be nicer, trying to do more acts of kindness, and not self-serving acts of charity, but just small, impacting people in small ways. And it is about me. When you do charitable things, it is about you. And I'm not some grand charitable person. I don't do that much. But I try, and I'm just trying to be a better person. I think that's a big part of it. And in being a better person, I haven't lost anything, and that's a big part. I do not feel I've lost anything. I haven't lost some resource. Like, I'm in another intense creative phase. I'm pretty much sober right now. I stopped smoking weed 2.5 weeks ago because I didn't need the benefits of weed, and I don't want the downsides of weed. I've always been a very productive stoner, but it does leave a lot of loose ends and a lot of guilt. I find that when I get high, I tend to feel very guilty, and I think it's important to feel guilty if you're trying to meditate on something and try to think about kinks in your system that you need to work out. Like, you do need to feel guilty over some of your actions, but I think something that I've struggled with weed and reasons why I've quit weed for periods of time is because it can just make you start feeling guilty all the time for like every little thing you do, and it can really hold you back. So I didn't need the benefits, and I didn't want the negative sides of it. And I think I will smoke weed again. Probably sooner, probably rather than later. I'm not cutting it out permanently, but it has felt surprisingly good to not smoke weed. And I haven't drank for 3.5 months, and that might be permanent, but I'm not going to be arrogant and stupid and say that I'm never drinking again. It's easy. It has been easy. It's been well, here's what it is. Not drinking has been easy, but it's been too easy. And that's what I tell myself. I don't say this is easy. I say this is too easy. And by saying it's too easy, that kind of preps me for, that broom that I'm going to step on, that rake. That prepares me for the rake that I'm going to step on that hits me in the face. Because if I just think there's, nothing in my way, and I'm just like, this has been easy, that's how you fall. That's how you fail. But if I say this has been too easy, it gives you an edge, a little bit of paranoia. So that's how I'm approaching it. And, I'm not saying I'm never going to drink again, but I know that I do not need alcohol at this point. Far too self-destructive. So we've covered the Black Knight archetype. We've covered Odin and investing in whatever you have to be in that given moment and not feeling inauthentic by being that Odin, by fully investing the whole of who you are. And you'll feel less dissonance if you accept that about yourself, that you are a dynamic person, and there are good things about you and there are bad things about you, and you don't have to feel excessively proud of the good things, and you don't have to feel excessively bad about the bad things. But, there's a balance to being who you are, and you can be a different person, and if you accept that, you'll be surprised at the different things that you start to feel comfortable doing, things that you otherwise never would have done. And I don't mean singing karaoke when you're sober. I use that example because a good friend of mine is in AA right now, one of my best friends, and he was saying how like they keep urging him to do karaoke, and I know from another friend in recovery that like her AA group had encouraged her, and I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to out these people, but she had told me a long time ago how they always went out for karaoke, and I think a big part of that is because it's something that makes people uncomfortable and nervous, and it's something that most people do drunk. And it's weird how karaoke's a theme, because I mentioned that wallet getting stolen in karaoke when I turned into the beast at that poor little thief. That sorry poor little thief, She didn't deserve to get yelled at. She did. She really did. Thieves deserve something, they don't deserve to be physically attacked, but they deserve to be interrogated. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm justifying my behavior. But karaoke... I realize that people in AA like to do karaoke, and I think whether they know they're doing it for these reasons or not, it's something they typically would have done drunk. It's something that typically would have made them uncomfortable, and by doing it, they're conquering something, and there's something profound in that. So my friend was talking about how they keep encouraging him to do karaoke, and I was like, wow, that's why. That makes total sense, doing something that makes you uncomfortable. And if you can do things that make you uncomfortable, you can invest yourself into actions and tasks that you otherwise wouldn't have felt like you could do. Like somebody who says, like, I don't sing karaoke, I can't sing, I can't do this, might suddenly find themselves embracing that and feeling like that is them. Even if they can't sing, they might find that singing in front of people is something that they feel one with the situation. And that's really all it comes down to, that Odin idea, is like being one with the situation. Being fucking present is like the cliche, like Buddhist, New Age, whatever it is. I don't even know what the source of that is, but being present, being one with the situation, that's really all it is. Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's more I could talk about. I think part of my own transformation away from being the. I think I'm like I don't ever want to lose that Black Knight part of myself, but I do want to be a dynamic person, and in a way that's natural. I don't want to be a cheesy like. I don't know. I don't want to ever be cheesy, even though I probably am. But I was thinking something about me that I've had to let go of, and that's kind of my interest in true crime. And when I say true crime, I specifically mean serial killers. I'm still very into the mafia, and I'm still very into like researching that because that's more sociological. It's less pathological to me. And even though there is violence and there are murders, it's such a footnote to the whole. To me, I'm interested in the system. It's fascinating sociologically. It's fascinating on a multitude of levels. Mafia is. Whereas serial killers, I feel like I reached the logical conclusion, and that sounds really dark. Like it sounds like I reached the logical conclusion to studying serial killers, which is like what, like hurting people? No, it's not. I think the logical conclusion of studying serial killers is really staring at the capability of man in the face, and by doing that you're looking at yourself. And I'm someone who's never had violent impulses, never had like serious pathological like perversions. We're all perverse in different ways, but I've never had those sorts of impulses. But I've been drawn to the subject of serial killers because they really are the abyss of humanity. They are the abyss in a way beyond even, like, you think about like a genocidal dictator who's responsible for far more deaths, and they're not quite as deep in the abyss as the serial killer, because the genocidal dictator is still surrounded, still like social, and it's a system. Once again, there's something else to it, even though I'd say in the long run they're worse. Right? See, what that's the thing. Why do we even need to like rank things? Like, this is worse than that. Like, we do that continually about what's my computer doing? I think it's all right. I'm just gonna check the levels real quick, make sure they didn't fuck with the sound. Started talking about genocidal dictators, and my computer's like, "You've talked for too long. You getting into that? You getting into that? We need to shut this down." No, we're still going. But with genocidal dictators, I feel like there is this. It's such a product of much larger forces than one man, even if one man is largely responsible for a lot of the horror, which often they are. But the serial killer is a solitary force, and as a solitary person myself, I think I was drawn to the subject and did a lot of self-examination, not because I ever related to the idea of the serial killer, but because I relate to the idea of loneliness, and the serial killer is truly not loneliness. I wouldn't say I'm an inherently lonely person, but I would say lonesome. I'm a lonesome, solitary person. And I think when you're lonesome and solitary, you spend a lot of time meditating in your own head in this weird, unchecked way that can be dangerous. And it can lead to really self-destructive thoughts. That's kind of how it was for me, is my own dark impulses are largely self-destructive. I've never had fantasies about, like, even when someone's done something really shitty to me, I've never had like a thought of like, I want to hurt that person. I want to kill that person. I have had like weird self-defense fantasies where like and I think this is more just like some normal man thing. I don't know. Just a normal man thing where I think like, oh, if someone were to break into my house, I'd do this. Or if someone were to like do this, I'd do this in response. I have had these weird sort of like, and I don't think they're weird. I honestly don't. I think it's some sort of natural thing. But like, I have had these self-defensive fantasies where it's like, if someone fuck with me, if you fuck with my family, you talking about my family, I'll do this. People always talk like that. But I have had those sorts of fantasies, but I've never had like a quote unquote proactive, like lashing out sort of fantasy. But I am a solitary guy who spent a lot of time in his own head, and I think that can be bad. I think that's alienated me and done things to me that I don't think were necessarily productive at the time. And the serial killer, very much, in almost all cases, they did the same thing. And what it did is whereas it sort of magnified my own self-destruction, I think with the serial killer, it magnifies self-destruction, but it really magnifies this outward destruction. Because I don't think there's anything morally wrong with self-destructive activities. Let me just say that. There's a lot of like righteous, pious bullshit focuses on like, don't drink, don't do this, don't fuck hookers, don't do this and that. And it's like, and hiring prostitutes has, there's some other implications there, and like the way women are treated and all that. So I mean, I didn't mean to go there. So that's not this topic. Anyway, like my basic point is that self-destruction isn't inherently immoral to me. Even if you're killing yourself and like everyone's upset about it, that's still your own business in a lot of ways, because this is my body, this is my life, this is my cheek. This is my cheek. I can poke my cheek if I want. But really, I do feel that way. I think where self-destruction becomes immoral, it's not that you're affecting people emotionally who are worried about you. It's that when you're self-destructive, it's a quick and slippery slope to being outwardly destructive. Someone who doesn't care about themselves very quickly can start hurting other people, both intentionally and unintentionally. And I mean, like, it's like if you don't value your life, chances are you really don't value other people's lives. And if you are a serial killer type, if you have that sort of pathology, if you don't care about yourself and you're stuck in this nasty nihilism, you opposed to positive nihilism, see my other video. But if you're this serial killer, you don't value yourself, and so you end up not valuing other people's lives. And if you have that sort of sick pathology where you fantasize about hurting people or abusing people, being self-destructive makes it real easy to do that, and that's fucked. So anyway, my interest in true crime and serial killers in particular, it was never, I never really, I don't know, it's weird because when you're very interested in that, like when everybody knows that about you too, it's like they think that you're pursuing it because of entertainment. It's like, and a lot of people do check that stuff out as entertainment. For me, it was pure study. When I was a little kid, my very first experience where I really remember like being like, what is up with this whole serial killer thing? I was a very young kid, and my mom would like stay up after I went to bed, and she would watch, as a very kind, like really at peace, wonderful woman. She's always been drawn to those sorts of shows, as many people are. I mean, look at television programming. It's like all true crime these days, and it has been for a long time. Look at how many documentaries and TV shows are based on that. But my mom would watch serial killer documentaries, like murder, mystery, whatever. And I remember once, like, I kind of stayed up and I snuck and I, like, peeked and she didn't know I was still up, and she was watching this John Wayne Gacy documentary, and it just blew my mind. Like, it was just like this, I was terrified, but it was like this whole other dimension opened up, like, of what humans are capable of. And it took a long time to process that whole thing, but from that point on, I was fascinated, and I wanted to know as much as I could about serial killers. But as a result, people start to like kind of typecast you, and like nobody ever, over the years, people have made jokes to me like, you might be a serial killer, and I hate that joke. It can be funny sometimes, but it's like I really hate that joke because it reaches a point where it's just like, oh, good one. It's almost like when you have a name that's like the same as some obscure celebrity and everybody brings it up. It's almost like that. It's like, oh yeah, I read about serial killers, so you're going to make the joke that I am one, blah, blah, blah. And I know like just being who I am, that there are certain qualities I have that also lend themselves to that. I'm a very solitary, independent person, and I have dark interests and some weird esoteric views on things. I mean, I haven't necessarily done a great job at protecting myself from those jokes, but at the same time, it does reach a point the older I get where I'm just like, come on. And now I'm at a point where I can't even really read about that stuff. As part of my own like quest for the light. I'm pursuing the light. I'm like a moth to a flame, a moth to a light bulb. But in being that way, in pursuing these like lighter things, I find that my stomach doesn't really handle the whole thing very well, because I've always been extremely squeamish, so I've never been able to handle some of the violence. Like reading about serial killers, I would have been content if every book just cut out the blood and guts and gore. I want to know about the MO. Like, did they use a knife? How did they kill them? But I don't need to know all the details. I don't need to see crime scene photos. That's never been my interest. My interest was always very psychological. I want to know about the crazy, ritualistic, weird, personal, I don't know. I mean, there's so much to that. But I was never interested in the blood and guts aspect. I don't like horror movies. People assume, that's another thing, is people assume that I'm this horror movie fan because I know a lot about serial killers, and I've always been interested in that. But I'm really not into horror movies. I don't like blood and guts. It's funny when I say that just even casually about just like blood and being in the hospital and things like that. There are these otherwise normal people who are like, "What do you mean you don't like blood? What do you mean?" And it's like, I don't know, for the same reason that I have an existential struggle with being a fucking person with skin and organs and internal processes, and that it all seems to come out in the form of this weird cerebral existence where I'm stuck in my head, for that reason. That's why I don't like blood. You want me to get into why like blood bothers me, or why, for the same reason I flush the fucking toilet when I go to the bathroom? I don't know, man. I'm weird about the human body, and it takes me a while to be comfortable with the human body, and by takes me a while, like it's been an entire lifetime, and I'm still not comfortable with it. So my interest has always been purely psychological, not blood and guts, not horror, none of that. But people have kind of like typecast me as like the serial killer guy, like the guy who's interested in serial killers, and they want to like talk to me about it. And now more than ever, when someone brings it up with me, I just feel like my spine stiffen up. Like, I love my family, and they've always been very supportive of my interests. But I remember like a couple Christmases ago, like I got a couple books about serial killers from family, and I was just like, I wanted to hand them back because I was like, I don't need these anymore. I've stared that abyss in the face and understood it to its logical extent. And I think it's important to understand those things. I think you have to try to understand the darkness of man if you're a man, because everyone can say like, I'd never hurt a fly. I'd never hurt a woman. I'd never hit a woman. People say that, and that's the same guy that goes and hits a woman, or the person who says like, I'd never kill a person. Are you kidding me? That's the same person who ends up killing someone, and then they're fucking shocked. They have to spend the rest of their life in prison wondering what the fuck led to that moment. Whereas I think if you stare that abyss in the face and you say, I'm a man, and I know what men are capable of, and because I know what men are capable of, and I'm a man, I have to accept that there's some component in me, there's something in my biological makeup, and not me alone, every man. Some probably more than others, but still, every man has some sort of it's like some chemical component that can be activated and make him do horrible things. And I think for me, studying serial killers was an attempt to understand that. Like, I want to know what the worst of us, the person who's truly the most lost in the abyss, the most lonesome person in this entire world, the true rebel. The term rebel has really been like mythologized to be this cool thing, but like serial killers, child molesters, people like that, they are the true rebels. And someone hearing that out of context would think like that's a good thing, because rebellion has been, like I said, it's turned into this good thing, like the rebellion against the empire, to use Star Wars as an example. But no, serial killers and child molesters and people like that, they're truly rebelling against everything society stands for in the worst possible way. And I feel like in order to understand us, we can't call them monsters. We have to say they are men, and they are largely men. I feel like I've talked about that before. Yeah, women do bad things, but this is a largely a male issue. And as a male, part of my understanding of the male pathology has been through true crime, and now I just don't have a use for it. So I don't want to watch those documentaries. I can talk about it. I like talking about it, but I like talking about it like this, about using it. Because I mean, like, when I think about people watching these documentaries and watching these TV shows, so much of it is this weird form of indulgence. And I do think you have to put killers on a pedestal. Like, you have to put serial killers on a pedestal in order to understand them. Just like you have to put things under a microscope, which is a form of pedestal itself. But you do have to put these killers on a pedestal in order to understand them, and you have to be careful about that, because it's not cool to be like, these guys are cool. These guys are so unique. These rebels. That's kind of the draw. Like, people who really like serial killers, there is that kind of person. It's the same sort of person who like worships the Columbine guys and things like that. These really, like, if those are your heroes, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? It's not funny though. Like, if those are the sorts of people that you want to identify with, because heroes aren't people you identify with, they're people you want to identify with. And if you want to identify with killers and like shooters and things like that, like, that's a topic for another time, but that's really I'm not best to talk about it. There's some people talking about that right now with all the shootings that have happened and stuff, and I think they have some great insight into that. But still, like an issue for me too is that I spent several years being serial killers for Halloween. And people always kind of loved it, but I think there's someone else who would think that I was somehow like hero worshiping them. But think about what Halloween is. It's like the classic examples. You dress up like ghouls, you dress up like bad things. For me, dressing up as a serial killer is like the ultimate Halloween costume. You're dressing up as the worst that man has to offer. And that was my draw. It wasn't to be cool. It wasn't to be like, hey man, look at my cool costume. If I wanted to be cool, I'd dress like fucking James Dean on Halloween. You know what I mean? Like last year even, like I dressed as Hulk Hogan, but I didn't dress as Hulk Hogan the good guy. I dressed as NWO Hollywood Hulk Hogan because he was the bad version, and that fits for Halloween. And it was just fun. And I did it because it was fun to like make that costume. But at the same time, like I didn't do it because I thought like bad Hulk Hogan is a great guy. Hulk Hogan's a piece of shit in real life. And maybe that's another reason too. Like, he played this all-American good guy. He was like the quintessential good guy in the 80s as a wrestler. But under the surface, all the stories that have come out is he was a piece of shit behind the scenes. The real Hulk Hogan is much closer to Hollywood NWO Hulk Hogan than the American, Mr. Whatever, Hulkamania Hulk Hogan. So, I mean, that's why I was, I didn't think it through that much. But talking about it now, like that's sort of like the gut reason why I was a serial killer for Halloween for several years, and that's the reason why I was Hollywood Hulk Hogan, the bad Hulk Hogan. That's what Halloween is. Halloween's always been a great holiday because it really is the chance to stare death in the face in this kind of celebratory way, without celebrating death itself, without celebrating bad things happening to people. You kind of celebrate the fact that we're human. And we sometimes like to stare into the abyss and the dark side and the mystical, weird, otherworldly things we don't understand, and not be ourselves. So anyway, I don't know. I feel like I can't really, when people bring up true crime to me now, or when I think about it, like I'm really averse to it. I'm just kind of like, it's like in The Godfather 2, the flashback scene when like the mob boss, and this probably isn't the best example, but the guy who Don Vito kills in order to become the new boss, Don Fazzini or whatever his fucking name is, he's the old guy. Like he goes and he sees this puppet show, and the puppet show has these soldiers fighting and killing each other, and like Don Fazzini or whatever, who's like the bad guy, he's like, oh no, too violent for me. There's a great he doesn't talk like that. He actually has a real Italian accent. But yeah, it's too violent for him, and that's kind of how I feel when I think about true crime and serial killers at this point. Is I'm kind of like, this is too much for me. I've gotten everything I need out of that subject in order to be a better person, because I wanted to understand the worst that humanity has to offer, and I'll always have a little bit of an interest in that stuff, but it reaches a point where it is just self-indulgent. I'm in my 30s, and the 30s I feel like are the point in your life when you really, if you can't change your life by the time you're in your 30s, you're really going to have a hard time. And I say that as someone who hasn't lived past my 30s. So I don't know how easy or hard it is, but I know it's hard for a lot of people even at this point. But I'm completely focused on really just improving myself. And I've used the abyss in order to do that. I needed to understand the abyss. I needed to spend 30 years studying the abyss so that at 32 I could have all that reference material. And the thing is I can still access that for artistic reasons. I will always be a dark artist. I will always pursue certain dark themes in my art, but I don't have to dwell there. I don't have to sit and just sit in that swamp. And the great thing about having gone somewhere in your mind is you can always, it's like finding an address. Like once you've been somewhere, especially if you've been there more than once, you can usually find your way there. You know which streets to take. I know which streets to take to get to the darker recesses of my creativity. I know if I need to be the wolf in a moment, if I need to confront a thief, I know how to get there. But the problem is when you don't, how I was saying in that moment when I was really mad at that thief, how I felt that invisible hand on me, and in retrospect I should have winked or whatever the fuck at the people I was with just to let them know that I was in control. I'm losing my train of thought. but I know the path to get there, so I can always get back there. Well, I know that I can always become that. I know that I can always access things for creative reasons or in practical situations where I need to be a warrior, where I need to be a tough guy, a pseudo-tough guy. I'm not very tough, but it's like I know how to get there. But when you don't know how to get there, that's when you do shitty things. If you know how to get there, you also know how to get back and you know your boundaries. But when you don't fucking know why you got there or how, that's when you do shitty things. That's when you do things you regret. And there's a whole world of gray areas in shitty things and regret. And I still do shitty things and I still do things I regret. But I know that the deeper I've gone in trying to understand my own dark side, the more control I have. The more I can be Odin, who goes into a situation and invests in it, but can divest himself too. The more I can be the Black Knight, who, you know, might have a certain image, but ultimately strives to do good. How is that for a way to tie all this shit together? This is almost an hour long. Should I keep going? No. I'm great at knowing how to get there with these videos, but sometimes it's getting back out. It's sometimes exiting these videos. It's so hard. Maybe one day I'll be a fucking pro. Tomorrow I'm going Sasquatch hunting. My friend Paul has a cabin at the ocean, and we're going to hit the rainforest. And I think he's a great example. He'd probably feel so weird of me talking about him in a long, weird YouTube video. But my buddy Paul Malik, he is a new friend of mine in the last year or so, and he's a horror aficionado. You're talking about how I have no interest in horror movies, and they kind of like, you know, if a friend is really passionate about something like that, I'll check him out. You know, I'll probably watch horror movies this weekend because I'll be staying at this cabin. But Paul's a guy who's like a horror aficionado, and he's actually I believe one of the biggest horror movie collectors in the world. I could be wrong, but I believe he's known. And he's a metal guy. He's got like all these dark interests, but he's a source of light and joy. And that's why I'm looking forward, you know, to hanging out. And going Sasquatch hunting. You know, he's also a Sasquatch hunter. And I feel like I'm in a good place. I'm searching for the light, and I'm going to hang out with somebody who's this massive horror movie collector who's also a great source of joy in like everybody's lives who he knows. And I feel like if anybody's going to fucking find Sasquatch this weekend, we probably have a good chance. If anybody's going to find Sasquatch, I feel like this crew of people have a good chance. So maybe next time I do a video, I'll be talking about how I saw Sasquatch. But that guy's a great example. You know, that's how I try to live. You go there in your mind so that you can. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm looking for Sasquatch right now. I'm trying to find Sasquatch in this webcam and this mic, and I'm not finding him. But I'll let you know if I do this weekend.